What up? My name is John Hill, and today we're going to talk about the 5 types of grind tricks that exist on rails. If you get these 5 dialed, every trick in the future you do on a rail will be much easier. So let's get started. Most of these techniques will apply to the round rail, but I will talk about the square rail throughout and tell you what the difference is. It's just in the streets and in most skate parks, you will come across round rails. So I think it's best to teach how to skate on these. So the first one I want to talk about is the Feeble grind. I think it's the easiest one out of these, at least for me. It definitely becomes one of the easier tricks to hold for a very long time, but it requires grinding with your back truck and letting your front truck hang to the left of the rail if you're regular and hang to the right of the rail if you're goofy. The Feeble and the Smith grind will be the exact same type of grind, but if you are regular footed, then a Smith grind is when you approach the rail in front of you, and a Feeble is when you approach the rail behind you, but you still get in the trick the same way. You want to ollie up and you want to put all your weight on your heel. So you want your left wheel to be pinched all the way up against the rail. So when you let your front dangle to the left of the rail, your heel, that center of gravity behind the left wheel that's pinched into the rail, will be what sustains the grind. It will be what keeps you up and what keeps the grind moving forward. So all the weight on the heel with your wheel pressed up all the way against the rail. This is how to do a proper Feeble grind. And when you do a kickflip Feeble in the future or a nollie Feeble, you'll still lock in the exact same way. So the issue with Feeble grinds on flat rails is that your wheel is propped up on the flat part, and it actually causes your board to flip a little easier out like that. So I think a square rail is a bit more difficult, but of course if you put enough weight on your heel period, you'll be able to ride away clean. Trick number 2 is the 50-50 grind. It's when you grind simultaneously on both trucks. Again, this applies to a regular footed person who grinds, but goofy is the exact same thing. Just switch up the left or right position the way I'm talking about. So for frontside 50-50 grind, usually most pros will pinch both of their left wheels up against the rail. They'll have the weight on their heels once again, just like the Feeble grind, and that's how they will hold it. But something a lot of pros have been doing recently, where they promise that they have more of a center of gravity, and what I do as well, for backside grinds, I actually cross pinch my trucks, which means my back truck, the wheel is pressed against the left, and then my front truck, the wheel is pressed against the right. I'm not sure why, but this does feel like you have more area to work with in the grind. It doesn't feel like everything is sustainable by your heels. It feels like you have your instep and your back heel and your whole foot is being supported by the board. So I love the cross pinch, and a lot of people have been applying this to a frontside 50-50 grind as well, but this is how I hold the 50-50. The difference between a 50-50 on a flat rail is that you don't really have to balance. It's actually much easier to learn on a square rail, but then eventually, at least for me, I like it on round rails more because it feels more precise. But at the beginning, much easier to do on a square rail. Trick number 3 is the 5-0 grind. It's when you grind with just your back truck across the rail, front side and back side. The next 3 are a little advanced of tricks on round rails, but we're just gonna get into it. So in the future, when you start learning 5-0s, nose grinds, or backsmiths, you can come back to this video. So if we talk about the 5-0 kind of works similarly to the 50-50. You want your back truck to go in the same spot, but you're gonna have to have a lot more support on your heels. You have to really press your heel into the rail, and you have to make sure that your shoe isn't sliding too hard on the rail, or it will stop you completely. So you have to find the perfect balance, and this takes, of course, trial and error, but eventually you're going to have your back truck pinched super hard against the left wheel if you're regular, the right wheel if you're goofy, and that's how you're gonna be able to hold the 5-0 while trying to keep your body perfectly centered over the rail. This same rule actually applies to a back 5-0. Back 5-0 is a little more complicated because you really have to undershoot your ollie. You have to make sure not to ollie too high or your board will flip over, too low and your board won't get up there. So the back 5-0 to me was a little confusing to figure out, but once you get on the rail, it feels the same as a front 5-0. The difference between 5-0ing a flat rail is the same as the 50-50. It's much easier to balance on a square rail. You have so much more surface area to have your back truck just gliding along. So if you're a beginner, 5-0 on a square rail, much easier. A good way to actually get the feel for these tricks is to do it with your hands. If your hands can do it, then that's where your feet should be. So for a 5-0, if I do it like this, what is easiest is if I put a lot of the pressure on my palm, which will be your heel, and then I'll put my other hand here, and then I can glide a 5-0 perfectly. Now, if I try to do it with just my toes, it's like trying to hold it with your fingers, which is much more difficult. So try to use your heel. use your hands to get the guide of what is most comfortable for your feet. Trick number 4 is the crooked grind and nose grind. I put these in the same category, even though they seem like wildly different tricks. You're really grinding on your board the exact same way. The crooked grind is actually a trick a lot of people learn quicker than the 5-0, but to me, I definitely had a lot more difficult with my front foot. But with the crooked grind, you want to have all of your weight on the top left pocket of your board. You want to make sure that your wheel is pressed really firmly against it. So when you're regular footed, it's your left wheel. Press firmly down to where your wheel is the only thing preventing your truck from slipping off the rail. That applies to all of these grind tricks. Make sure that the wheel is pressed all the way up against the rail. Never grind in the middle of your truck. That is not realistic, and that is not the way you do grind tricks. So for the crooked grind, you have to lean forward. The more on top of the rail, AKA the more firm you're standing straight up, the easier and better you will grind. If you're leaning to the right or leaning to the left, you're just gonna teeter-totter and fall one of the other ways. For the nose grind, it's the same thing as the crooked grind once you get on top, but it requires a bit more of an ollie. You have to make sure that you ollie over the rail and then slam your front trick on the exact same way you would do a crook. Now, a lot of people have the conversation between an over crook and a nose grind, and they say, well, they're two different tricks. They're not. In skateboarding, as you move forward, you can call it either one. It's totally fine. But a nose grind on a rail, the only way to really do it is to pinch your wheel up against the rail, and that is a nose grind. Or it can be an over crook because that's technically what you're grinding. So either one's fine. The difference between crooking and nose grinding a square rail is that the crook feels a lot more like a ledge because your nose is pressed on the flat part on top, which is kind of like a ledge. And then for nose grind, it's a little awkward because you wouldn't be going all the way over to a crook. You'd probably just be balancing like you would a ledge anyways. So it's probably a little easier to learn on a square rail. And finally, trick number 5 is the front feeble and backsmith. The reason these seem a little more difficult on this chart is because you are grinding slightly backwards. With the back feeble, your shoulders are facing forward so you can tell where you're going. With the front feeble and the backsmith, you have to look over your shoulder, and it makes everything feel just a bit more dangerous. The front feeble and backsmith look very similar to the front smith slash back feeble. The way your board is grinding is the exact same. The part of the truck that's grinding versus the part of the board that's leaning over the rail is the same. But since you're grinding backwards, you actually have a different part of your foot pressing against the board onto the rail. So instead of a feeble, where your heel is pressing down on this back wheel to make sure it stays, on a front feeble, your front toes are what is keeping all the weight down on these wheels. So the more your back foot is actually on the heel, on the edge like this, the better you can hold the grind. So for this one, it's a little awkward because you're gonna have to learn how to ollie and then maneuver your back foot a little off the board and put all the weight on your toes. And from there, you can hold this trick for as long as you want, just like the other ones, but it's gonna require a lot of practice. And the more you practice these tricks, the longer you'll be able to hold them, the more consistent you'll be at all of them. The difference between front feeble and backsmiths on a square rail, to me, are the same as the feeble. It's a bit more difficult to kind of hold it, but maybe it's a little easier to learn. Backsmith is a little awkward because you have to aim for this big wide area. A round rail is just really easy to kind of get into. It's this skinny. Square rail, you have to get into it perfectly, and then you have to be sure that it doesn't flip out. And don't worry if you're just starting off and you're like, wow, these tricks are very difficult. They're actually slightly more advanced. I think a back 5-0, a nose grind, etc. can be pretty difficult tricks, and there are some even pro skaters who don't really do these tricks consistently, but that's how you do them. So in the future, if you are preparing to do them, watch this video and it'll give you good perspective. Also, if you are interested in either of these two rails, they are my custom rails that I did with Transformers rails, which are like the best skateboard product ramp designers out in the biz. And then of course, you know, it has my personal touch on them, on the ideas of how to keep the rails perfect. They don't move at all. And that was kind of the idea of putting this thing on the bottom that prevents them from sliding one bit. And then of course the color design is mine. And then also the legs being really small so they don't get in your way was another idea that I came up with, so that it'd be much easier for anyone, especially myself, to get into the tricks without your wheels hitting the legs and then spiraling out of control. So progressdaily.com if you want to cop one of these rails and get to practicing today, because I have been skateboarding for 20 years, professional skateboarder, and I still enjoy these sessions more than anything. Putting the rails in my car, coming to a parking lot, and just trying to figure out a lot of different tricks. So in the future, when you do move on to other tricks, a switch nose grind, a fakie nose grind, fakie salad, whatever the hell you're getting into in the future, all of them will require one of these 5 principles to work. So if you know these and you feel these and you grind these well, then every trick in the future will be much easier for you. So thanks for watching. If you did enjoy this video, let me know down below. And of course, every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, there's a new video on this channel. So stay tuned for all of that. And then on the other days of the week, my Progress Daily channel is uploading a video. So a day, every day on my channels. Check it out, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Take care, Progress Daily, and keep killing it.